The massive hall of the Galactic Defense Council buzzed with excited chatter as representatives from dozens of alien species gathered for the war meeting. The holographic projector hummed to life in the center of the room, casting a blue glow across the faces of military commanders who had traveled from across the galaxy to see humanity's secret weapon. What appeared on screen made the room fall silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then the laughter began. The UES Persistence floated in the hologram like a cosmic joke. Its hull looked like someone had taken pieces from a dozen different ships and welded them together during a particularly bad hangover. The metal plating didn't match. Some sections were dull gray, others bright silver, and a few patches looked suspiciously like they'd been cut from cargo containers. Thick cables and pipes ran along the outside of the ship where they should have been hidden inside. Protective armor. The engines were clearly designed for hauling freight, not fighting wars. Admiral Vextar, whose crystalline body sparkled with natural armor that could deflect energy weapons, made a sound that his species used to express disbelief. His translator converted it to a very human-sounding snort. "This is humanity's great contribution to our war effort. It looks like something a scrap dealer would be embarrassed to sell." Commander Thale's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he studied the image. His people built ships that were works of art. Smooth curves, perfect angles, every surface polished to mirror brightness. I have personally seen asteroid mining vessels with better defensive plating than this thing. The other alien commanders joined in with their own observations. Someone from the Spiral Coalition mentioned that their civilian transport ships had more impressive weapon systems. A representative from the Outer Rim territories wondered aloud if the humans were playing some kind of elaborate practical joke. Through all of this, Captain Li Jin stood perfectly still at the front of the Ye chamber. His face, weathered by years of hard work in dangerous places, showed no reaction to the mockery. The man had spent 2 decades working in the asteroid fields where a single mistake could kill everyone on your crew. A room full of laughing aliens wasn't going to rattle him. Behind him, his 3 crew members waited with the same calm patience. Chief Engineer Park Hannah had hands stained with grease that no amount of washing could completely remove. She'd kept failing machinery running in conditions that would have sent most engineers screaming back to their home planets. Weapons Officer Kim Tae looked more like a construction worker than a military man, which made sense since he'd spent 15 years building mining installations in hostile environments. Navigator Choi Min was young, but had already guided ships through asteroid fields so dense that computer navigation systems gave up and recommended finding another route. They'd all heard variations of these same jokes before. Every time they docked at a major station, other crews would point and whisper about the ugly human ship with its mismatched parts and obvious repairs. When the laughter finally died down, Li Jin spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the chamber without being raised. "With all due respect to the honored council members, the Persistence has been tested in combat 17 times against hostile forces. My crew and I are still here to talk about it." Admiral Vextar's crystalline features shifted into what might have been a smirk. "Combat against pirates and small raiding parties, Captain. The Void Collective fields warships the size of cities with weapons that can crack planets. They will reduce your rust bucket to floating debris in the first few seconds of engagement." The hologram began to rotate, giving everyone a full view of the Persistence from every angle. The weapon mounts were clearly improvised. Industrial equipment that had been modified to hold military hardware. What looked like mining lasers had been upgraded with power boosters. Cargo manipulation arms had been fitted with magnetic grapples that could grab and throw objects in zero gravity. The whole ship screamed of desperate improvisation and making do with whatever was available. To the assembled alien commanders, it represented everything they considered primitive about human technology. Their own ships were marvels of engineering, built in orbital shipyards by teams of specialists using materials that cost more than most planets' annual budgets. Every system was designed by experts, tested by computers, and refined through centuries of military tradition. The human ship looked like it had been built in someone's garage by people who learned engineering from fixing broken equipment rather than studying in universities. What none of them realized was that this apparent weakness was actually humanity's greatest strength. While other species built ships to fight the last war, humans built ships to survive whatever came next. Where others saw primitive improvisation, the crew of the Persistence saw practical solutions to real problems. The aliens would learn this lesson soon enough. The Void Collective was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one with the fanciest weapons, but the one who refuses to quit and knows how to make something out of nothing. As the meeting broke up and the various commanders returned to their flagships, none of them paid much attention to the four humans quietly leaving the chamber. They were too busy discussing real military strategy to worry about what the primitive Earthlings might contribute to the war effort. They would remember this moment later, when the war's outcome hung on the actions of that ugly, patched-together ship and its crew of former workers who treated space combat like just another job that needed doing. The moment arrived faster than anyone expected. Long-range sensors detected the Void Collective fleet approaching the Kepler defense line, a strategic choke point that protected 3 major trade routes. Every available ship in the Allied fleet moved into position for what military analysts predicted would be the war's first major engagement. The crystalline ships of Admiral Vextar's fleet arranged themselves in perfect diamond formations that had been used successfully for over 2 centuries. Each vessel knew exactly where to position itself, how to angle its shields, and when to fire in coordinated volleys. Their tactics were taught in every military academy across the galaxy and had never failed against conventional opponents. The Tech Union forces under Commander Thale deployed in their trademark hexagonal pattern, overlapping energy shields, creating an impenetrable barrier while their precision weapons charged for calculated strikes. Computer systems ran millions of battle simulations per second, adjusting formation and weapon targeting for maximum efficiency. Both fleets represented the pinnacle of military science, centuries of warfare experience refined into perfect tactical doctrine. The Persistence hung at the edge of the formation like an ugly stepchild at a family gathering. Captain Li Jin watched the enemy ships approach on his patched-together display screen. The Void Collective vessels were impressive in their own terrifying way, black, angular shapes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their weapons glowed with dark energy that made hardened military veterans nervous just looking at it. The battle began exactly as predicted. Energy beams lanced between the opposing fleets while shields flared and deflected incoming fire. The crystalline ships moved in perfect synchronization, their formation shifting like a beautiful, deadly dance. The Tech Union vessels focused their fire with computer precision, each shot calculated for maximum damage. For 10 minutes, it looked like a textbook engagement between evenly matched forces. Then everything changed. A Void Collective heavy cruiser, its hull cracked and bleeding atmosphere, began pulling back from the main battle line. Standard military doctrine called for pursuing such targets with long-range weapons while maintaining formation integrity. Li Jin had different ideas. Ramming speed, he ordered calmly, as if he was telling his crew to adjust course around an asteroid. Navigator. Choi Min's hands froze over her controls. Sir, that's not a recognized tactical maneuver. The collision will destroy both ships. Do it. The bridge fell silent, except for the hum of engines spinning up to maximum power. Through the viewports, they could see the damaged enemy vessel growing larger as the Persistence accelerated toward it like a guided missile. On the flagship of Faos, the crystalline fleet, Admiral Vextar watched in horror as the human ship broke formation and charged directly at the enemy. What is that madman doing? He'll be killed. Commander Thale's 4 eyes tracked the Persistence's trajectory with disbelief. They're attempting a direct collision. No shields, no evasive maneuvers. It's suicide. The collision, when it came, was spectacular. The Persistence's reinforced mining prow, designed to break apart asteroids the size of city blocks, punched through the enemy ship's hull like a spear through paper. But instead of being destroyed by the impact, the human vessel kept going, its industrial-grade construction allowing it to literally punch a hole through the enemy cruiser and emerge from the other side. Debris and sparks trailed behind the Persistence. As it cleared the wreckage, its hull scarred but intact. The Void Collective heavy cruiser, meanwhile, broke apart in a chain reaction of explosions that lit up the battlefield. The alien commanders stared in stunned silence at their tactical displays. The supposedly primitive human ship had just eliminated a target that would have required concentrated fire from multiple vessels using conventional weapons. "They're completely insane," whispered Commander Thale, his translator struggling to convey the mixture of horror and admiration in his voice. "Chief," Engineer Park Hana's voice crackled over the communications channel, sounding as casual as if she was discussing the weather. "Captain, I've been watching those floating weapon platforms they're using for point defense. I think I have an idea." "I'm listening," Li Jin replied, steering the Persistence toward a cluster of enemy fighters that were harassing the crystalline formation. "Those cargo manipulator arms we use for moving asteroid chunks, they're rated for objects up to 50 tons. There's plenty of debris floating around from that cruiser we just punched through." Within minutes, the alien fleets witnessed something that no military academy had ever prepared them for. The Persistence was using its industrial equipment, massive mechanical arms designed for handling raw materials in asteroid mining operations, to grab chunks of wreckage and hurl them at enemy fighters with devastating accuracy. The Void Collective pilots, trained to dodge energy weapons and missile attacks, had no idea how to handle flying debris launched by what amounted to a cosmic slingshot. Fighter after fighter was destroyed by improvised projectiles moving at incredible velocity. The battle turned into a rout. Faced with tactics they couldn't understand or counter, the Void Collective forces retreated in confusion, leaving behind a debris field and a lot of very confused alien military commanders. As the enemy ships disappeared into hyperspace, the Allied fleet tried to process what they had just witnessed. Every principle of space combat they had learned was apparently negotiable in the hands of humans who treated war like just another industrial job that needed doing. The Persistence had won the day not through superior technology or advanced tactics, but by refusing to follow any rules except the ones that worked. 3 days after the battle, Captain Li Jin found himself sitting in the most luxurious conference room he'd ever seen. The flagship of the crystalline fleet was a marvel of engineering. Walls that seemed to be carved from single pieces of living crystal, furniture that adjusted itself to whoever sat in it, and a holographic display system so advanced it made reality look cheap. Around the polished table sat the most decorated military minds in the galaxy. Admirals who had graduated from prestigious war colleges, commanders who had written textbooks on space combat theory, and tactical experts whose families had served in their respective fleets for generations. They were all staring at Li Jin, like he was some kind of fascinating alien specimen. Admiral Vexitar leaned forward, his crystalline features catching the light in patterns that indicated deep curiosity. "Captain, we've reviewed your service records. 20 years in the asteroid mining operations in the Outer Rim. Before that, construction work on the Mars orbital platforms. You have no formal military training whatsoever." "That's correct," Li Jin replied, completely unbothered by the observation. "You're Chief Engineer Park Hana, 15 years maintaining salvage equipment in the dead zone, where ships go to be scrapped. Your weapons officer Kim Tae spent a decade building mining installations on worlds where the atmosphere tries to kill you. Every day, Navigator Choi Min guided cargo haulers through asteroid fields that most pilots wouldn't attempt even with full computer assistance." Li Jin nodded. "Sounds about right." The alien commanders exchanged glances. Commander Thale spoke up, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of confusion in his species. "You're not soldiers. None of you have any military background at all." "No," Li Jin said simply. "We're workers. We fix things when they break, move things from one place to another, and break things down when they're in the way. Space is just another workplace to us." This answer seemed to disturb the alien officers more than it reassured them. In their cultures, warfare was a specialized profession requiring years of training and study. The idea that someone could be effective in combat without understanding military theory was almost incomprehensible. Weapons Officer Kim Tae, who had been quietly watching the battle footage replay on the room's secondary displays, finally spoke up. "Every problem has a solution. You just have to look at it from the right angle. That enemy cruiser was damaged and trying to retreat in construction work, That's what we call a controlled demolition opportunity. A what? Admiral Vextar asked. When you're tearing down a building, sometimes you get lucky and find one that's already structurally compromised. Instead of spending time and resources on a full demolition setup, you just give it the right push in the right place and let physics do the work. The military minds around the table struggled to process this perspective. Their academies had taught them to think in terms of force multiplication, tactical advantage, and strategic positioning. The humans were describing combat in terms of workplace efficiency and practical problem-solving. Navigator Choi Min activated her personal datapad and projected a schematic of the persistence onto the main display. Look, we know our ship isn't as advanced as yours. We can't afford fancy shield generators or exotic energy weapons, so we work with what we have. She highlighted different sections of the ship as she spoke. No advanced shields, so we built redundant systems. If something gets damaged, we have backups for the backups. Can't match your energy weapons, so we focus on kinetic solutions, things that work even when the power goes out. Every piece of equipment on our ship has at least 3 different uses. The schematic showed modifications that made the alien engineers wince. Life support systems that could be converted into pressure bombs, navigation sensors rewired to track industrial materials, cargo equipment that doubled as weapons platforms. "This is complete chaos," muttered Commander Thaler, his translator adding a note of distress to his words. Chief Engineer Park Hana laughed, a sound that seemed startlingly human in the sterile perfection of the alien flagship. "No, this is adaptation. When your plasma cutter breaks down 3 light years from the nearest repair station, you have 2 choices. Figure out how to fix it with whatever you have on hand, or die waiting for help that's never coming." She stood up and walked to the display, pointing to various modifications. "See this? That's a food processor we turned into a chemical reaction chamber. This over here? Water recycling system converted into a pressure delivery mechanism. When you work in places where calling for help isn't an option, you learn to make one thing do the job of 10 things." The revelation was deeply unsettling to minds trained in military precision and standardized procedures. These humans weren't treating the galaxy's greatest threat like a military problem at all. They were approaching the Void Collective the same way they'd approach a particularly challenging mining operation or a construction project, with impossible deadlines and insufficient resources. Admiral Vextar sat back in his chair, which immediately adjusted to support his new position. "You're telling us that you defeated a collective heavy cruiser by treating it like industrial waste disposal?" "Pretty much," Li Jin confirmed. "Big, dangerous obstacle in our way. We removed it using the most efficient method available." The silence that followed was profound. Across the galaxy, military colleges were about to have their curricula completely rewritten by people who had learned their skills in asteroid mines and construction sites, rather than war rooms and training simulators. The Helix Nebula had always been considered a natural fortress. Swirling clouds of cosmic dust and electromagnetic interference made it nearly impossible for large fleets to navigate, while the narrow entry points could be easily defended by whoever got there first. It was the perfect place for the Void Collective to make their stand. Intelligence reports confirmed everyone's worst fears. 300 enemy vessels had taken position within the nebula's protective embrace, the largest concentration of collective forces ever assembled in one location. The dark ships arranged themselves in patterns that seemed to absorb light from the surrounding stars, creating an ominous shadow against the colorful nebula backdrop. The Allied response was everything military doctrine demanded. Admiral Vextar's crystalline fleet formed up in their traditional battle formations, each ship positioned to provide maximum firepower while maintaining defensive integrity. Commander Thal's Tech Union vessels deployed their most advanced shield harmonics, creating overlapping energy barriers that should have been impenetrable. The battle plan was textbook perfect: long-range energy bombardment to soften enemy defenses, followed by coordinated shield frequency adjustments to maximize penetration, then graduated escalation protocols that would systematically dismantle the enemy formation using centuries of proven tactical doctrine. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. Energy beams crisscrossed the void in brilliant displays of military precision. The crystalline ships moved like clockwork, their formations shifting and adapting as their computers calculated optimal firing solutions. The Tech Union vessels maintained perfect shield coordination, their defensive systems working in harmony to deflect incoming attacks. The problem was, none of it was working. The Void collective ships absorbed the punishment like it was nothing more than a light rain. Their dark hulls seemed to drink in the energy weapons, while their own return fire struck with devastating accuracy. One by one, Allied ships began reporting shield failures, hull breaches, and critical system damage. All ships maintain formation and continue bombardment, Admiral Vextar commanded from his flagship's bridge, even as warning lights flashed around him and his shields flickered dangerously under enemy fire. His voice carried the confidence of someone trained to follow established procedures, even when those procedures weren't working. That's when the Persistence broke formation. The ugly human ship peeled away from the Allied battle line like a piece of debris caught in a solar wind. Its mismatched hull plating and jury-rigged systems looked even more primitive against the backdrop of sleek alien warships engaged in their deadly dance. "Captain Li Jin, return to position immediately," came Admiral Vextar's urgent transmission. The crystalline commander's voice carried undertones of panic that his translator struggled to convey. Li Jin's response was maddeningly calm. "Negative. We're going fishing." On the bridges of a dozen different ships, alien commanders tried to figure out what that phrase could possibly mean in a military context. Their computers ran through translation matrices and cultural databases, finding nothing that made sense. The Persistence dove beneath the main battle, apparently heading straight into the heart of the enemy formation. To the watching alien officers, it looked like the humans had finally snapped under pressure and decided to go out in a blaze of suicidal glory. But inside the human ship, something very different was happening. "Scanning now," announced Chief Engineer Park Hana, her hands dancing over controls that had been designed to analyze asteroid composition for mining operations. The sensors that normally looked for valuable metals and structural weaknesses in space rocks were now studying the energy signatures of enemy warships. The display screens filled with data that would have meant nothing to a military officer but told a clear story to someone with mining experience. Power flow patterns, energy distribution networks, and structural load points appeared as clearly as if they were looking at a blueprint. "Got it," Park Hana announced with the satisfaction of someone who had just solved a particularly tricky engineering problem. Their power grid is centralized, classic pyramid structure. Everything feeds up to a central distribution point, then back down to individual systems. Weapons Officer Kim Tae studied the data with the eye of someone who had spent years working on construction projects. "It's like a corporate hierarchy," he observed. "Cut the head off and the whole body stops working." Navigator Choi Min was already plotting an approach vector that would take them through the enemy formation along the most efficient route. "I can get us to the power distribution nodes on these ships here, here, and here," she said, highlighting targets on the tactical display. What happened next would be talked about in military academies for generations, though most of the instructors would struggle to explain exactly why it worked. The Persistence accelerated toward the collective's command vessel, but instead of making a direct attack, it began firing at seemingly random points on the smaller escort ships. To the alien observers, it looked like panic fire, desperate shots with no tactical purpose. In reality, every shot was precisely targeted at power conduits that Park Hana's mining sensors had identified. Kim Tae's construction experience told him exactly where to hit, to cause maximum structural damage with minimum effort. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. As each ship's power grid overloaded from the targeted damage, the energy feedback traveled through the collective's networked systems like electricity following a wire. Ship after ship experienced cascading power failures as the overloads rippled through their interconnected formation. Within minutes, half the Void collective fleet was dead in space, their crews struggling desperately to restore power to critical systems while their ships drifted helplessly in the cosmic wind. The Allied forces, who had been preparing for a fighting retreat just moments before, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that couldn't shoot back. The victory that followed was swift and decisive, with disabled collective ships either surrendering or being destroyed by concentrated fire from the now reorganized Allied fleet. As the last enemy vessel either fled or exploded, a stunned silence fell over the Allied communications channels. The galaxy's finest military minds were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth that would reshape their understanding of warfare forever. Centuries of advanced tactical doctrine, sophisticated weapon systems, and military tradition had just been completely outmaneuvered by 4 humans who treated space combat like an industrial maintenance problem. The flood of communication requests started before the debris from the Helix Nebula battle had even finished cooling. Captain Li Jin's personal message system, which normally received maybe 3 calls per week from supply coordinators and duty schedulers, suddenly lit up with priority transmissions from military leaders across the galaxy. The first call came from Admiral Vexistar himself, his crystalline features displaying what his species considered polite curiosity. "Captain, the Crystalline Empire's Strategic Planning Division would like to schedule a consultation regarding what our analysts are calling asymmetric warfare principles. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation for your time." Before Li Jin could respond, another message arrived from Commander Thale's Engineering Corps. "We require detailed technical specifications for your improvised weapons systems. Our fabrication teams are standing by to begin production immediately." Within 72 hours, requests were pouring in from military organizations that Li Jin had never even heard of. The Spiral Coalition wanted to license human tactical methods. The Outer Rim Defense Force requested training materials for something they called creative battlefield solutions. Even the notoriously secretive Shadow Fleet sent an encrypted message asking about unconventional problem-solving techniques. Li Jin found himself standing in front of the largest military briefing room he'd ever seen, facing an audience of the galaxy's most decorated officers. Medals and honors that represented centuries of military tradition glittered under the room's lighting. These were beings who had graduated from the most prestigious war colleges, written textbooks on space combat theory, and commanded fleets. In battles that had shaped galactic history, they were all taking notes like eager students. "You're thinking too hard," Li Jin told them, his voice carrying easily through the room despite not being raised. "Every enemy has patterns, how they move, how they communicate, how they respond to threats. Your job is to find the pattern, then break it." The room fell silent. Several alien commanders looked confused, as if waiting for the rest of the explanation. Admiral Vextar leaned forward in his specially designed chair. "But, Captain, how do you determine which pattern to disrupt? Surely there must be mathematical models, probability calculations, computer simulations to analyze the optimal approach." Navigator Choi Min, who had been quietly watching the assembled officers, spoke up from her position near the tactical display. "It's the same way you know which support beam to cut when you're demolishing a building. You look at the structure, understand how the weight is distributed, and make an educated guess based on experience and intuition." The alien commanders exchanged glances that their translators interpreted as various degrees of bewilderment. Their military academies had taught them to rely on detailed analysis, computer modeling that could run millions of scenarios per second, and statistical probability calculations that could predict enemy behavior with mathematical precision. Thuesh, humans were describing something that sounded more like craftsmanship than science. Commander Thale was the first to voice what many of them were thinking. "We need human advisors assigned to every major vessel in our fleets, immediately." The transformation that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen since the invention of faster-than-light travel. Within weeks, Allied ships began carrying what became known as human kits, collections of basic tools, spare parts, and raw materials that could be quickly jury-rigged into weapons, repairs, or solutions to problems that hadn't even been imagined. Yet, more importantly, crews started looking at their environment differently. Instead of seeing empty space punctuated by specific military targets, they began noticing potential resources everywhere. Asteroid fields became ammunition supplies. Debris from previous battles turned into improvised weapons. Even cosmic phenomena like solar flares and gravitational anomalies were suddenly viewed as tactical opportunities rather than obstacles to avoid. Chief Engineer Park Hana found herself running training programs that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Alien engineers who had spent decades learning to follow precise technical manuals were now being taught to think like salvage operators, working with whatever happened to be available. "Forget everything you know about proper procedures," she told a class of tech union engineers, whose four eyes blinked in synchronized distress. "If your primary system fails, you don't wait for replacement parts. You make the secondary system do the job, even if it wasn't designed for it. If the secondary system fails too, you figure out how to make the tertiary system work. If that fails, you start getting creative with whatever's lying around." The results were immediate and dramatic. Routine patrol missions turned into devastating ambushes as human-trained crews learned to use asteroid debris and space junk as weapons. Enemy formations that had operated successfully for centuries suddenly found themselves facing opponents who seemed to have no respect for established tactical doctrine. Most significantly, the Void Collective's sophisticated tactical algorithms began showing signs of strain. Their computer systems had been programmed to counter every known form of military strategy in the galaxy, with response protocols for thousands of different combat scenarios. They had no protocols for dealing with opponents who treated warfare like an industrial maintenance problem, approaching each battle as if it were a construction project with an impossible deadline and insufficient resources. The galaxy's military establishment was learning that sometimes the best way to win a war wasn't to outthink your enemy or outgun them, but to simply refuse to play by the same rules they expected everyone else to follow. The emergency meeting was called at 0300 ship time, which meant the news was either very good or absolutely terrible. Looking at the faces around the war room table, Captain Li Jin could tell it wasn't good news. The holographic display showed intelligence data that had been gathered at enormous cost, 3 deep reconnaissance missions that had lost 2 ships and nearly 50 crew members. What they had discovered changed everything about the war they thought they were fighting. Hidden in the depths of the Abyss sector, where cosmic radiation made sensors unreliable and navigation nearly impossible, the Void Collective had built something that defied imagination. The command nexus was a structure the size of a small moon, bristling with communications arrays and quantum processing centers that coordinated every enemy ship across the galaxy through instantaneous quantum entanglement networks. "This is how they've been staying one step ahead of us," Admiral Vexitar explained, his crystalline features reflecting the data streams flowing across the display. Every tactical decision, every fleet movement, every strategic adjustment, it all flows through this central hub and gets distributed to their forces in real time. Commander Thale's 4 eyes studied the defensive readings with growing dismay. The facility is protected by their entire strategic reserve, over 800 vessels in defensive formation, energy shields that could deflect the combined firepower of our entire Allied fleet, sensor networks so sophisticated they could detect a single fighter craft from 3 star systems away. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Every conventional military approach led to the same conclusion: complete annihilation of any attacking force long before they could get within weapons range of the target. "It's suicide," Admiral Vexitar stated flatly, his translator adding undertones of finality to the words. "Even if we committed every ship in the Allied fleet to a direct assault, the energy signatures of our advanced vessels would trigger their detection systems long before we reached strike range. They would have hours to prepare for our arrival. The Allied fleet's most sophisticated ships were actually working against them in this scenario. The crystalline vessels with their exotic energy cores, the Tech Union ships with their quantum processing systems, the advanced stealth technology that other species had developed, all of it generated signatures that the Void Collective's sensors were specifically designed to detect and track." Captain Li Jin had been studying the tactical display in silence, his weathered face showing the same expression he wore when examining a particularly challenging mining survey. Finally, he spoke up. "What if they're not looking for the right kind of ship?" The alien commanders turned to him with expressions ranging from curiosity to desperation. At this point, they were willing to listen to any idea, no matter how unconventional. "Explain," Commander Thale demanded, his voice carrying hope despite his species' natural pessimism. Li Jin stood and walked to the display, pointing at the sensor readings from the Nexus facility. Look at what their detection systems are scanning. Forest exotic energy signatures, quantum processor emissions, crystalline matrix resonance patterns. All the stuff that makes your ship so advanced. He gestured toward the data representing his own vessel. The Persistence doesn't have any of that. No exotic energy signatures because we use basic fusion reactors. No quantum processors because our computers are simple digital systems. No crystalline matrix cores because we can't afford them. Park Hana, who had been following his logic, nodded, slowly. To their sensors, we'd just be background noise. Cosmic radiation, industrial fusion signatures, basic electromagnetic emissions. We'd look like space debris, or maybe a lost cargo hauler drifting through their territory. The plan that emerged from the next 6 hours of discussion would have been rejected immediately by any sane military planning committee. Strip the Persistence of every piece of equipment that might register as military hardware, remove the weapons, disable the defensive systems, even shut down the life support systems that generated detectable energy signatures. In place of proper military equipment, they would load the ship with improvised explosives built from industrial materials, jury-rigged, weapons constructed from mining equipment, and enough raw materials to turn the vessel into a floating bomb factory once it reached its destination. The mission profile was simple in concept and terrifying in execution. Fly the disguised ship directly through the heart of enemy territory, penetrate the Nexus facility's defenses by pretending to be harmless debris, then cause enough damage to shut down the collective's coordination network permanently. "So you're asking us to approve a suicide mission," Admiral Vextar said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had just realized he was about to send 4 humans to their deaths. Li Jin met his gaze steadily. "No. We're asking you to approve a demolition job. There's a big difference." "What difference?" Commander Thale asked. "In a suicide mission, you don't expect to come back. In a demolition job, you plan the work so you can walk away from the explosion." The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Every member of the War Council approved the mission, though several of them looked physically ill as they cast their approval. They were authorizing what amounted to the most desperate gamble in galactic military history. Weapons Officer Kim Tae began preparing shaped charges from mining explosives. Navigator Choi Min plotted approach vectors that would make their journey look like random drift rather than purposeful navigation. Chief Engineer Park Hana started the systematic cannibalization of their own ship's systems, turning the Persistence into something that had never existed before, a weapon disguised as worthless junk. The ship that had been mocked for its primitive appearance was about to become the most dangerous vessel in the galaxy, precisely because it looked like nothing worth worrying about. As Li Jin watched his crew prepare for what might be their final mission, he couldn't help but smile. The Persistence was indeed about to live up to its name, just not in any way the galaxy's military experts had ever imagined. The journey into the Abyss sector felt like traveling through the graveyard of the galaxy. Here, in the space between star systems, cosmic radiation played havoc with navigation equipment, while the twisted remains of ancient battles drifted in the eternal darkness. It was the perfect place to hide something you never wanted anyone to find. For 3 weeks, the Persistence drifted through this cosmic wasteland like a ghost ship. The crew had shut down every non-essential system, reducing their energy signature to barely above background radiation. The ship's lights were off, heating was minimal, and even the artificial gravity had been disabled to conserve power. They moved through space in total silence, carried forward by momentum and careful adjustments from tiny thruster burns that looked like natural outgassing from a derelict vessel. Living conditions were beyond miserable. The crew wore bulky environmental suits 24 hours a day, their breath fogging the faceplates as they worked in near-freezing temperatures. Every meal came from emergency rations that tasted like recycled cardboard. Sleep came in short, uncomfortable shifts while floating in zero gravity, always ready to wake up if enemy sensors detected them. Void Patrol bearing 27 Mark 6, Navigator Choi Min whispered into her helmet communicator, her voice barely audible even over the internal radio system. Through the darkened viewports, they could see the sleek black shapes of enemy vessels passing less than 2 kilometers away. The patrol ships were hunting for exactly what the Persistence was pretending not to be, an infiltration vessel trying to penetrate collective territory. Their sensors swept the area with methodical precision, analyzing every piece of floating debris for signs of hidden technology or life signs. The human ship registered on their scans as nothing more than another chunk of war debris. Twisted, metal dead power systems, and the kind of industrial fusion signature that came from civilian vessels that had been destroyed in combat. The enemy sensors found exactly what they expected to find in a battlefield graveyard. Junk. The patrol ships didn't even slow down as they passed. Their crews focused on detecting the sophisticated stealth technology they knew the Allied forces possessed. They were looking for energy shields, quantum processors, and exotic weapon signatures. The primitive human vessel with its basic systems and industrial-grade components was beneath their notice. Inside the ship, Chief Engineer Park Hana worked in conditions that would have driven most people insane. With only the faint glow of a HFY Story handheld worklight, she carefully dismantled their own life support systems to build the most comprehensive demolition setup in galactic history. Every component that could be spared was being converted into an instrument of destruction. The food processors, normally used to turn basic nutrients into something resembling actual meals, were being rewired into chemical reaction chambers that could mix industrial compounds into high-yield explosives. The water recycling systems that kept the crew alive were carefully converted into pressure bombs that could deliver devastating force to specific structural points. Even the atmospheric scrubbers that cleaned their air were being turned into dispersal systems for chemical agents. "This is the craziest thing I've ever done," Weapons Officer Kim Tae muttered as he helped wire detonators made from emergency beacon components. His hands were steady despite the cold, but his voice carried the undertone of someone who was beginning to fully understand the magnitude of what they were attempting. Park Hana paused in her work, looking up from a device that had once been part of their shower system and was now a sophisticated timing mechanism. "How you said that exact same thing about the asteroid mine collapse we triggered on Kepler 442. That was different," Kim Tae protested. "That was just a controlled mining accident to clear an unstable tunnel. This is..." He gestured around the ship, which now looked more like a bomb factory than a vessel designed to keep people alive. "This is just a bigger mining accident," Park Hana replied, with the kind of calm confidence that came from 20 years of working with explosives in dangerous environments. Same principles, larger scale. As they approached their target, the high-def Nexus facility appeared on their long-range sensors, exactly where the intelligence reports had predicted. The structure was mind-boggling in its scale, an artificial moon bristling with communication arrays, defensive weapon systems, and sensor networks that could coordinate military operations across entire star systems. Captain Lee Jin studied the massive target through sensors they had salvaged from destroyed enemy vessels and jury-rigged into their navigation system. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were using collective technology to plan the destruction of the collective's most important facility. "Same basic principles as any controlled demolition job," he observed, his voice carrying the professional assessment of someone who had brought down structures that most people couldn't even imagine. "Find the load-bearing supports, identify the critical systems, place your charges in the right sequence, and calculate the timing so everything comes down in the right order." Navigator Choi Min, who was monitoring their approach vector while simultaneously tracking the movements of hundreds of enemy vessels, couldn't resist pointing out the obvious flaw in the comparison. "Except most buildings don't shoot back when you're trying to demolish them." Lee Jin's response carried the dry humor of someone who had worked in dangerous conditions for most of his adult life. "Every job has occupational hazards. This one just has more interesting ones than usual." The Persistence continued its dead stick approach, now close enough to see individual weapon emplacements and docking bays on the massive enemy structure. The crew held their collective breath as automated scanning systems swept over their vessel, waiting for the moment when their carefully constructed disguise would finally fail and every enemy ship in the sector would converge on their position. That moment never came. The Void Collective's incredibly sophisticated sensor networks, designed to detect and counter the most advanced military technology in the galaxy, were completely blind to the threat drifting toward them, disguised as industrial space junk. They were looking for a military vessel equipped with advanced weapons and stealth technology. What they found was exactly what the humans wanted them to find: another piece of debris in a sector full of wreckage, not worth a second glance from. Beings who had never learned to see potential in things that looked worthless. The moment they crossed the Nexus facility's outer defensive perimeter, everything changed aboard the Persistence. The ship that had drifted through space like a dead hulk for 3 weeks suddenly came alive with purposeful activity. But this wasn't the familiar hum of a warship preparing for battle. It was the methodical preparation of a demolition crew getting ready for the biggest job of their careers. Chief Engineer Park Hana moved through the ship like a conductor leading an orchestra, activating systems that had never been intended to work together in any sane engineering manual. The cargo bay, normally used for storing mining equipment and supplies, had been converted into a weapons factory. Assembly lines made from repurposed food preparation equipment churned out shaped charges, while automated systems that once recycled water now mixed chemical compounds with deadly precision. The life support systems, stripped down to their absolute bare minimum to keep the crew alive, had been rewired into delivery mechanisms that could place explosives with surgical accuracy throughout the massive enemy structure. Every breath of air they took was now being carefully rationed to power systems designed to bring down the most important military installation in Void Collective space. Charges placed on structural support 7 through 12, Weapons Officer Kim Tae reported, his voice crackling over the internal communications system. He was using maintenance drones, simple robots designed for routine ship repairs, to carry explosives through the Nexus facility's massive corridors. The enemy's security systems were programmed to look for armed intruders, not repair bots going about their normal business. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The Void Collective's obsession with advanced technology had created blind spots that industrial workers could exploit. Their sensors could detect the most sophisticated stealth systems in the galaxy, but completely ignored the kind of basic maintenance equipment that kept any large facility running. Quantum Entanglement Hub located, Navigator Choi Min announced, from her position at the navigation station, which had been converted into a demolition control center. Her voice carried the satisfaction of someone who had just solved a complex three-dimensional puzzle. It's exactly where the structural analysis said it would be, dead center of the power distribution network. Captain Lee Jin studied the tactical display with the professional eye of someone who had spent 20 years figuring out how to take apart things that weren't supposed to come apart. The massive Nexus facility spread out before them like a three-dimensional blueprint, every critical system highlighted and analyzed according to principles that had nothing to do with military strategy and everything to do with understanding how things were built. Same basic engineering principles as any major construction project, he observed, with the kind of calm satisfaction that came from recognizing a familiar problem in an unfamiliar setting. Doesn't matter if it's built by humans, aliens, or hostile space empires. Find the foundation points, identify the load-bearing supports, compromise the structural integrity in the right sequence, and let physics do the heavy lifting. The Persistence had been systematically gutted during their 3-week approach to create what was essentially a floating demolition company equipped with the most comprehensive destructive capability in galactic history. Where other ships carried energy weapons and missile systems, they carried industrial cutting charges designed to slice through materials that could withstand the pressure of planetary cores. Where other vessels relied on armor plating and defensive shields, they had shaped demolition devices that could direct explosive force with mathematical precision. Every component that could be spared had been converted into tools of destruction. The ship's computer systems, once used for navigation and life support, now calculated blast patterns and structural stress points. Communication equipment had been rewired into detonation control systems. Even their sleeping quarters had been converted into manufacturing spaces for the exotic compounds needed to bring down a structure the size of a small moon. 30 seconds to cascade failure, Park Hana announced as her improvised systems reached the critical parameters she had calculated during weeks of careful preparation. Her voice carried the professional calm of someone who had triggered controlled demolitions that most people couldn't even imagine. But there was an undertone of excitement that came from knowing she was about to pull off the most ambitious engineering project in galactic history. The Void Collective's massive command nexus was about to learn what happened when centuries of military doctrine encountered decades of practical mining expertise. Every critical system, every structural support beam, every power conduit had been identified and targeted using principles learned from asteroid demolition work in the most dangerous environments humanity had ever tried to operate in. All stations, prepare for emergency evacuation, Captain Li Jin ordered, as the final countdown timer began its relentless march toward zero. Even his calm voice carried a hint of tension, not from fear, but from the professional anticipation of someone who was about to find out if 20 years of experience had taught him everything he needed to know about bringing down impossible structures. The explosion, when it finally came, was unlike anything anyone in the galaxy had ever witnessed. It wasn't the chaotic detonation of a military bombardment or the random destruction of a terrorist attack. It was a carefully orchestrated structural collapse that unfolded with mathematical precision, each charge triggering at exactly the right moment to maximize the cascade effect that followed. The Nexus didn't just explode, it folded in on itself like a house of cards built by engineers who understood exactly which card to remove first. The quantum entanglement network that had coordinated Void Collective operations across hundreds of star systems died in microseconds, taking with it 3 centuries of tactical coordination protocols and strategic communication systems. Across the galaxy, enemy fleets that had moved with perfect synchronization suddenly found themselves operating in complete isolation. Ships that had anticipated their allies' movements with computer precision now drifted in confusion as their command network simply vanished. The perfect coordination that had made the Void Collective such a formidable opponent was shattered by what would officially be recorded as an industrial accident that happened to occur in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. The war had just been won by 4 humans who treated the galaxy's most sophisticated military installation like any other demolition job that needed doing. The journey home took longer than anyone had expected, but that was hardly surprising, given the condition of the Persistence after its mission. The ship that limped back into Allied space 3 months later barely resembled the vessel that had departed on what most observers had assumed would be a suicide mission. Entire sections of the hull were missing, replaced by metal plates salvaged from destroyed Void Collective vessels. The engines ran on a mixture of human engineering and alien technology that no maintenance manual in the galaxy could have predicted. What had once been weapon systems were now structural supports, while former life support equipment had been converted into propulsion systems that somehow managed to push the ship forward, despite violating several fundamental principles of physics. Chief Engineer Park Hana had taken to calling their method of staying operational aggressive optimism, the philosophy that if you believed hard enough that something should work and applied enough creative engineering, you could usually make it happen. The fact that they were still alive and moving under their own power was testament to the effectiveness of this approach, even if it gave alien engineers nightmares just looking at it. The Galactic Defense Council chamber had never seen crowds like the ones that gathered for the victory ceremony. Representatives from species that had been fighting each other for centuries stood shoulder to shoulder, united in their desire to understand how 4 humans in an ugly ship had accomplished what the combined military might of the galaxy had failed to achieve. The ceremony itself was unlike anything in galactic history. Captain Li Jin and his crew received medals, honors, and awards from dozens of different species, crystalline sculptures that sang in harmonious frequencies, technology gifts worth more than most planets' annual budgets, and formal declarations of eternal friendship, written in languages that had never before been used to honor non-native speakers. The most surreal moment came when Admiral Vextar, whose crystalline features were now arranged in what his species considered the highest expression of respect, asked the question that everyone in the chamber was thinking. "Captain Li Jin, how did you know your plan would work? What calculations? What computer models? What strategic analysis convinced you that such an unconventional approach could succeed?" Li Jin's response was so simple that several translators asked for clarification, certain they had missed something important. He shrugged, a gesture that didn't translate well for most alien species, but somehow conveyed exactly the right meaning. Same, where you know any controlled demolition will work. You study the structure until you understand how it's put together. You place your charges in the right spots, and then you trust the physics to do what physics always does. The war was officially over. Though scattered void collective forces would continue to cause problems for years to come, but their coordination was broken, their command structure was gone, and their ability to operate as a unified threat had been eliminated not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by 4 humans who had treated the galaxy's greatest threat like any other engineering problem that needed solving. They had found the weak points in an apparently invincible enemy, applied the right tools with the resources they had available, and solved a problem that had stumped the finest military minds in galactic history. The aftermath brought changes that no one had anticipated. Navigator Choi Min found herself teaching courses at the Galactic Military Academy with titles like Practical Problem Solving in Combat Situations and Alternative Approaches to Tactical Planning. Her classes were always overbooked, with military officers from across the galaxy eager to learn how to think like civilian workers rather than professional soldiers. Weapons Officer Kim Tae became the galaxy's most sought-after consultant on adaptive resource utilization, the art of making weapons and tools from whatever happened to be available in any given situation. His seminars on emergency innovation were attended by everyone from starship engineers to planetary defense coordinators. Chief, Engineer Park Hana wrote textbooks that revolutionized engineering education across dozens of star systems. Her books on emergency innovation protocols and creative problem-solving under pressure became required reading in technical schools that had previously focused on following established procedures rather than developing the ability to improvise solutions. But the real lesson that spread throughout galactic civilization wasn't contained in any course or textbook. It was a fundamental shift in thinking, the uniquely human approach of looking at an impossible situation and asking not, "Can this be done?" but "How can this be done?" The persistence itself was eventually retired to the Museum of Galactic History, where its patched hull and jury-rigged systems were preserved as a permanent reminder that sometimes the best solution to a complex problem isn't the most sophisticated one. Sometimes it's just the one that actually works. Millions of visitors would come to see the ugly little ship that had changed the course of galactic history. School children would press their faces against the protective barriers, trying to understand how something so primitive-looking could have accomplished something so important. The galaxy had learned something that would reshape civilization for generations to come. Humanity's greatest contribution to galactic society wasn't advanced technology or superior military doctrine. It was the simple refusal to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable, combined with the creativity to find solutions in places where others saw only limitations. In the end, they hadn't just won a war against an implacable enemy. They had taught an entire galaxy how to think differently about problems, possibilities, and the power of looking at familiar situations from completely new perspectives. The universe would never be quite the same again, and that was exactly the point.